Hi everybody, Stefan Molyneux from Free Domain Radio. Hope you're doing well. Hey, did you happen to hear over the weekend, or perhaps today, one day before Super Tuesday, that Donald Trump has been endorsed by a former KKK leader, and that Donald has refused to repudiate this endorsement? You may have heard this if you've, say, been online or anywhere near the mainstream media. Facts, they are such stubborn things. Let's actually find out what happened. So according to the media, Donald Trump is trying to clean up a racially charged controversy Monday after he refused to disavow former Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke over the weekend. When asked about his comments on CNN's State of the Union, Trump blamed a bad earpiece. Quote, "I was sitting in a house in Florida with a bad earpiece," the brash billionaire told NBC's Today Show. "I could hardly hear what he's saying. I hear various groups. I don't mind disavowing anyone. I disavowed Duke the day before at a major conference." So, first of all, Donald Trump did disavow Dr. David Duke, and he disavowed David Duke last summer as well. This was in August, and again, the sources to this are all below. Donald Trump says he isn't interested in the endorsement of David Duke. Quote, "I don't need his endorsement. I certainly wouldn't want his endorsement," Trump said during an interview with Bloomberg's Mark Halperin and John Heilemann. He added, quote, "I don't need anyone's endorsement." Asked whether he would repudiate Duke's endorsement, Trump said, "Sure, I would if that would make you feel better." Now, with regards to David Duke, Dr. Duke left the Klan almost 40 years ago. His group currently rejects all violence, and he said, "Listen, I joined the Klan as a young man, and it was a terrible mistake, and never at any point in his life, according to David Duke, did he ever support the supremacy of any one race over any other race." So his quote with regards to this is, "I'm not saying I endorse everything about Trump. In fact, I haven't formally endorsed him, but I do support his candidacy, and I support voting for him as a strategic action. I hope he does everything we hope he will do." So, of course, you see the headlines all over the place. Former KKK leader endorses Donald Trump, which he hasn't actually done. Now, with regards to the double standard, the left-leaning bias, pro-leftist, pro-Democrat bias of the media, where like 95% of the reporters in Washington self-identify as Democrats, there was a fellow named Robert Byrd, a long-serving Democrat politician who was a KKK member in his youth. What about President Harry Truman, also KKK member in his youth? What about World War I Democrat President Woodrow Wilson, who negotiated the Treaty of Versailles? Good job, WW. He was also a Klan member in his youth. And that's, I guess, somewhat important. Nelson Mandela was a communist for a lot longer than David Duke was in the KKK. Was Nelson Mandela ever introduced on the mainstream media as a former communist, or current communist, as some claim? And we got a presentation about all of this, which we can link below. So Robert Byrd, member of the KKK in his youth. Now, in May 2008, despite massive extended lobbying from Hillary Clinton, with whom Robert Byrd had a personal friendship, he's dead now, but the West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd actually endorsed Barack Obama in the Democratic primary. That's 4 days after his state had voted overwhelmingly for Clinton. So here we have a mainstream politician who is endorsed by a former member of the KKK. Was Barack Obama ever asked to disavow the endorsement of a former KKK member? Now, Hillary Clinton, writing about Robert Byrd, former KKK member, wrote, quote, "It is almost impossible to imagine the United States Senate without Robert Byrd. He was not just its longest serving member, he was its heart and soul. From my first day in the Senate, I sought out his guidance, and he was always generous with his time and his wisdom." And that is Hillary Clinton writing about a former member of the KKK. Was Obama ever asked by the press to disavow the Nation of Islam, the New Black Panthers, and La Raza? I'm not saying they're equivalent to the KKK, but they are somewhat racially focused groups. Now, in 2012, then President Barack Obama did actually get a critical endorsement. And that critical endorsement was the Communist Party of the United States of America. The Communist Party USA leader, Sam Webb, explains why he will continue to support Obama and the Democrats in 2012. And the Communist Party of America has consistently supported and infiltrated the Democrat Party in the United States. So, KKK, nasty institution. Communism, a bit more of a nasty institution. So, there are estimates that the death count of the KKK from the mid-1800s until about 1964 is 4,743 people that were murdered by the KKK. The estimated death count of communism, a little bit higher, at 94 million people. For those counting at home, for every one person the KKK killed, the communists killed 19,819. Would you like to hear that again? The doctrine of communism was responsible for almost 20,000 times the death count of the KKK, and yet when the communists repeatedly endorse Democrats, nobody is ever asked to repudiate those representing one of the most destructive and hideous and mass-murdering ideologies in history. So there's that hypocrisy as well. Now, the KKK is often ascribed to people on the right, but it's actually not really the case. And again, we've got sources to all of this below. The KKK was the terrorist arm of the Democratic Party. And they had overlapping membership roles. And gun control, Democrats are very big into gun control. Actually, gun control was originally promulgated by Democrats to make sure that blacks never got a hold of guns, which allowed the Democrat policy of slavery to continue without so much resistance from armed blacks. After the Civil War, the Democratic KKK menaced and murdered black Americans without much resistance, of course, because the black Americans, like those people in Paris recently, were not allowed to own weapons. Now, the original target of the KKK were Republicans, black and white. The Democrats started the KKK and for decades harassed the Republicans with lynchings and threats. Now, of the number of people killed by the KKK, about an estimate 3,446 blacks were killed by the KKK and 1,297 whites. That's from 1882 to 1964. Quote, the Klan terrorized black Americans through murders and public floggings. Relief was granted only if individuals promised not to vote for Republican tickets, and violation of this oath was punishable by death. Since the Klan targeted Republicans in general, it did not limit its violence simply to black Republicans. White Republicans were also included. So, just kind of ironic that the Democratic Party is so anti-KKK when it was originally an outgrowth of the Democratic Party targeting Republicans. Now, this is a very old tactic. You dig up someone whose beliefs are unpalatable to the general population, and then you demand almost always of a Republican candidate, do you disavow this person? And it's a no-win game, which we'll get to in a second. So, very libertarian Republican Senator Barry Goldwater was often challenged by the media to disavow the KKK and the John Birch Society. The Democrat, Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society programs of the 1960s, endless tsunamis of stolen money, welfare. How's that working out for America as a whole? The Democrat, LBJ, was never challenged by the mainstream media to disavow or reject support from significant leftists like the Americans for Democratic Action or the Socialist Party, or even the tacit support that was granted to LBJ by organized communists. So again, it's very much a one-sided view. Ronald Reagan was repeatedly asked to denounce the KKK, and he did so. Now, for those very concerned with illegal immigration, Ronald Reagan is not quite the hero as he is to those who believe that Ronald Reagan, by defying Gorbachev about arms limitations, ended the Cold War, because Ronald Reagan was boosted to the presidency in part because he had a foundational pledge to stop illegal immigration. But Ronald Reagan instead turned around and actually signed the first and the very biggest amnesty bill. So that's not particularly great. The KKK being used to discredit Republicans. That's an old tactic. There's a photo you can find online. We can link to it below, where there are a whole bunch of KKK members dressed up holding pro-Trump signs. This photo made its rounds until somebody pointed out that, these brain surgeons have their hands sticking out of the KKK costumes, and the hands are black hands. And that didn't really work. Now, if you're going to play the game, which is, hey, I found some crazy guys or some guys with unpalatable or nasty beliefs who support you, do you reject them? Well, you cannot conceivably become an expert on everyone who might support you, who has supported you, who will support you. So that's a game that doesn't end. The correct response, I believe, is, okay, tell me who you have asked the Democrats to repudiate. And if you cannot find, or you cannot give me an example of anyone you've asked the Democrats to repudiate, then I don't want to talk to you, because I'm not playing this stupid gotcha game designed to discredit Republicans by applying unfair standards to them, never applied to Democrats. So you can never win this game, so you've just got to keep on moving. And, this is just another example of, I've got a simple test here for you. How do you know the mainstream media is lying? Well, there's a couple of signs. I'll just give them to you here for free. But if you want to support the show, freedomainradio.com/donate, freedomainradio.com/donate. Really appreciate that. So here are some tips as to whether or not the mainstream media is lying. Do you feel confused and resentful? Do you feel that you have sudden rage against people you don't really know much about circumstances which are somewhat murky to you? Do you feel suddenly set against your fellow citizen for reasons that don't make any sense? Do you feel that people are acting in inexplicable ways to destroy, perhaps, say, their chance of winning some sort of presidential nomination, and it just doesn't make any sense? Another way of telling if the mainstream media is lying would be something like this. Is your television warm? Is your electricity bill slowly climbing the staircase of allowing ions to indoctrinate your brain with misinformation? Or more simply, here's how to tell. Is the mainstream media lying to you? The answer, is it on?